February 1513, Florence. A man hangs by his wrists in a dungeon, shoulders dislocated, blood dripping from his fingertips. His crime? Knowing too much about power. 6 months later, this broken prisoner will write the most dangerous book in history, a manual so ruthless that kings, dictators, and CEOs still follow its rules 500 years later. The irony cuts like a blade. The man who never held real power became the teacher of every tyrant that followed. They called him evil. They banned his book. They turned his name into a curse. But here's what they didn't tell you. Niccolò Machiavelli wasn't born a monster. He was forged into one by a world that rewarded only the ruthless and devoured the naive. This isn't the sanitized story they teach in universities. This is the brutal truth about the man who decoded power, paid for it with his flesh, and left behind a legacy that still terrifies the weak and guides the strong. Every ruler, every CEO, every politician carries a ghost in their shadow, the ghost of a man who died poor, forgotten, and branded as the devil's advocate. Yet his fingerprints are on every throne, every boardroom decision, every calculated betrayal that shapes our world. Machiavelli didn't write about power from an ivory tower. He bled for it, literally. He watched republics fall, witnessed kings murdered, saw idealists crushed beneath the wheels of ambition like insects on stone. His education came not from books, but from watching humanity's darkest theater play out in Renaissance Italy. A world where mercy was suicide and virtue was a luxury the weak couldn't afford. This is not the story of a villain. This is the story of a mirror, a man who held up reality to the world and forced it to stare at its own reflection. What it saw was so horrifying that it tried to destroy the mirror instead of facing the truth. Today, you'll meet the real Machiavelli, not the cartoon devil, but the broken idealist who became the world's most brutal teacher. His lesson was simple. In a world of predators, learn to be the apex predator, or become prey. May 3rd, 1469. Florence, the jewel of the Renaissance, gives birth to a child who will teach the world to rule. But this Florence isn't the romantic city of your history books. It's a blood-soaked chessboard where beauty masks brutality, and art hides assassination. Picture this. Leonardo da Vinci paints masterpieces by day, and designs siege weapons by night. The Medici bank funds churches while poisoning rivals. Every palazzo hides a plot. Every alliance masks a betrayal. This is young Niccolò's classroom, not books and lectures, but conspiracies and corpses. His father, Bernardo, is a lawyer drowning in debt. The Machiavelli name once meant something. Now it means nothing. In a world where bloodline is destiny, Niccolò starts at the bottom, hungry, ambitious, and dangerously intelligent. The boy who would terrify kings grows up watching power from the outside, studying it like a disease he's desperate to catch. He reads Livy, Plutarch, and Cicero, not for entertainment, but for ammunition. Every classical hero becomes a case study in the mathematics of dominance. But here's the cruel joke. Young Machiavelli believes in justice. He thinks virtue matters. He imagines a world where good men can win without becoming monsters. Florence will cure him of these illusions with surgical precision. 1498, the year everything changes. Girolamo Savonarola, the fire-breathing monk who turned Florence into a theocracy, burns in the same square where he burned vanities and books. Niccolò, now 29, watches the flames consume the man who promised to purify the world through righteousness. The lesson hits him like a physical blow. Good intentions are kindling for stronger men's fires. When the smoke clears, Florence gasps back to life as a republic. The old guard is dead, and opportunity bleeds through the cracks. Niccolò Machiavelli, armed with classical education and desperate hunger, claws his way into the second chancery of the Florentine Republic. His first taste of power is intoxicating. He's not just a civil servant, he's a diplomatic weapon, sent to negotiate with kings and pope, to spy on enemies and assess threats. But it's a poisoned chalice. Every mission teaches him that the world operates on principles that would make Dante weep. The idealist begins his education in the University of Human Darkness, and the tuition will be paid in blood, his own and others. June 24th, 1502. Urbino. Two men sit across from each other in a candlelit room. One is Niccolò Machiavelli, Florence's rising diplomatic star. The other is Cesare Borgia, the bastard son of a pope, the most feared man in Italy. Borgia leans forward, his voice soft as silk and sharp as a stiletto. I don't like your government, and I cannot trust it. You must change it and offer guarantees. If you don't want me as a friend, you will find out what it is like to have me as an enemy. Machiavelli feels ice in his veins. This isn't diplomacy. It's extortion delivered with surgical precision. But he's mesmerized. Here sits a man who has seized duchies, murdered rivals, and bent the Catholic Church to his will. At 27, Borgia has achieved what most men couldn't accomplish in 3 lifetimes. The meeting lasts hours. Machiavelli watches Borgia work, every gesture calculated, every word weighted, every silence pregnant with threat. This is power in its purest form, stripped of pretense and moral costume. It's beautiful and terrifying, like watching a master surgeon perform an amputation without anesthesia. Borgia arranges for Leonardo da Vinci to join his court as military engineer. Art, science, politics, all tools in the same brutal game. Machiavelli rides back to Florence at breakneck speed, carrying intelligence that could save or damn his city. But he also carries something else. A new understanding of what leadership actually requires. The lesson burns itself into his brain. Men like Borgia don't succeed despite their cruelty. They succeed because of their clarity. They see the world as it is, not as it should be. December 31st, 1502. Senigallia. Machiavelli watches Cesare Borgia orchestrate the perfect betrayal. Borgia has invited his rebellious commanders to negotiate a peace treaty. They come expecting diplomacy. They find death. One by one, Borgia's enemies enter the town. Vitellozzo Vitelli, Oliverotto da Fermo, Duke Gravina. These are hardened killers, men who have butchered their way across Italy. But they walk into Borgia's trap like lambs to slaughter. Machiavelli observes from the shadows as Borgia's soldiers seize the rebel commanders. No dramatic speeches, no unnecessary cruelty, just efficient, clinical removal of obstacles. By dawn, the rebellion is finished. The rebels are dead, their armies absorbed, their territories claimed. The lesson crystallizes in Machiavelli's mind. Mercy is a luxury the powerful can't afford. Every enemy left alive is a future threat. Every act of kindness is a potential knife in your back. But there's a deeper lesson here, one that will haunt Machiavelli for the rest of his life. Borgia succeeds not through random violence, but through strategic brutality. His cruelty serves purpose. It solves problems. It creates peace through the application of precisely calculated fear. This isn't the behavior of a monster. It's the behavior of a master craftsman whose medium happens to be human life. From 1498 to 1512, Machiavelli serves as Florence's diplomatic troubleshooter. He negotiates with King Louis XV of France, watches Emperor Maximilian fail to conquer Italy, and witnesses Pope Julius II wage war like a medieval warlord. Every mission teaches him the same lesson. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. Treaties are toilet paper when power shifts. Alliances last only as long as mutual benefit. Honor is a word weak men use to justify their defeats. He watches Florence, his beloved republic, stumble from crisis to crisis, saved only by the selfishness of its enemies and the protection of France. The city he serves is everything he believed government should be: moderate, deliberative, humane. It's also weak, indecisive, and constantly on the verge of annihilation. The contrast with men like Borgia couldn't be starker. Borgia builds an empire in 5 years through strategic violence. Florence barely survives 14 years through strategic begging. The lesson writes itself in blood across Italy. Good government is suicidal government. The world belongs to those willing to take it. By 1512, Machiavelli has become Italy's premier intelligence analyst. He understands power better than almost anyone alive, how it's seized, how it's maintained, how it's lost. He's watched republics die and kingdoms rise. He's seen good men destroyed by their virtue and evil men triumph through their clarity. But understanding power and wielding it are different skills entirely. Machiavelli remains a servant, not a master, an advisor, not a ruler. A man who knows everything about commanding armies but has never held a sword. This gap between knowledge and application will define the tragedy of his life. He becomes the world's greatest expert on power at the exact moment when power slips forever from his grasp. The irony is exquisite and brutal. The man who will teach kings how to rule is about to learn what it means to be ruled. August 1512. The earth trembles beneath the boots of Spanish soldiers marching toward Florence. Pope Julius II and the Spanish crown have formed an unholy alliance to restore the Medici family to power and destroy the Florentine Republic. At Prato, 8 miles north of Florence, the Spanish army demonstrates why they rule half the known world. They storm the city walls, butcher the defenders, and unleash their soldiers on the civilian population. The message to Florence is written in blood: surrender or share Prato's fate. Machiavelli races to the scene of devastation. Bodies litter the streets. Women and children lie butchered beside soldiers. The Spanish troops celebrate their victory by demonstrating what happens to cities that resist their masters. He sends desperate letters back to Florence. They spare no one. The cruelty is beyond description. We must prepare for siege or negotiate surrender. But Florence's leaders, the same men who spent 14 years talking when they should have been acting, now panic when action might still save them. Within days, Florence capitulates without firing a shot. The Republic dies not with a bang, but with a whimper. Piero Soderini, the gonfalonier who employed Machiavelli, flees the city like a thief in the night. The Medici return to cheering crowds, the same crowds that cheered their exile 18 years earlier. Overnight, Niccolò Machiavelli transforms from the Republic's most valuable diplomat to its most dangerous liability. November 7th, 1512. A letter arrives at Machiavelli's office, sealed with the Medici coat of arms. 3 lines of text destroy 14 years of service. Your employment is terminated. You are banned from the palazzo. You will not enter the city territory for 1 year. No trial, no charges, no opportunity for defense. The new regime dispenses with legal niceties. Machiavelli's association with the Republic marks him as an enemy of the state. But termination isn't enough for the Medici. They need to send a message: serve us, or face annihilation. On February 12, 1513, Machiavelli's name appears on a list of conspirators allegedly plotting against the new government. The evidence is tissue thin, a few names on a scrap of paper found in a suspect's possession. But evidence is irrelevant when the verdict is predetermined. Machiavelli is arrested, chained, and dragged to the Bargello prison. The man who dined with kings and negotiated with emperors finds himself in a cell with common criminals, awaiting interrogation by men who view torture as a routine investigative tool. The strappado is Renaissance Italy's signature torture method. The victim's hands are tied behind his back. Then he's hoisted by the wrists until his shoulders dislocate. The pain is indescribable, a fire that consumes every nerve, every thought, every hope. They drop Machiavelli several times, letting gravity add velocity to agony. Each drop tears his shoulders further apart, sends lightning through his spine, drives him closer to madness. But they want names, conspirators, evidence of plots that may not even exist. Here's the beautiful, terrible irony. The man who understands torture as a political tool must now experience it as a victim. The student of power discovers what power feels like when it's turned against him. But Machiavelli doesn't break. Whether through stubborn courage or simple ignorance of any conspiracy, He gives them nothing. No names, no confessions, no validation of their suspicions. After weeks of agony, a papal election provides his salvation. Giovanni de' Medici becomes Pope Leo X, and Florence declares a general amnesty to celebrate. Machiavelli stumbles from prison a broken man, physically shattered, politically destroyed, financially ruined. The diplomat who once commanded respect across Europe is now a marked man who cannot enter his own city. The Renaissance has taught him its final, cruelest lesson: power is everything, and without it, you are nothing. Machiavelli's farm in Sant'Andrea is 7 miles from Florence, close enough to see the city walls, far enough to remember his exile. Here, the former diplomat discovers what lies beneath the veneer of civilization: endless, grinding monotony. His daily routine would break lesser men. He rises before dawn to set bird traps, returning with a few scrawny thrushes that represent his only source of protein. He argues with peasants over wood prices, settles disputes about property lines, and listens to complaints about weather and taxes. These are his companions now, men who know nothing of statecraft, who care nothing for the great games of power that once consumed his life. They speak of crops and animals, of local gossip and petty rivalries. After 14 years negotiating with the most sophisticated minds in Europe, Machiavelli finds himself discussing pig feed with farmers who can barely read. Yet there's a strange comfort in this simplicity. The peasants don't betray each other for abstract principles. They don't wage war over theological differences. Their concerns are immediate, concrete, human, but evenings bring a different kind of company, one that transforms the exile into something approaching paradise. Every evening, as shadows lengthen across the Tuscan hills, Niccolò Machiavelli performs a ritual that keeps him sane. He strips off his peasant clothes, washes the day's grime from his hands, and dresses in his finest garments, the diplomatic robes that once opened palace doors across Europe. Then he enters his study and begins the most important conversations of his life, not with living men, but with the greatest minds in human history. He reads Livy's histories of Rome and argues with the dead historian about republican virtue. He studies Plutarch's biographies and debates the ethical choices of ancient heroes. He absorbs Cicero's rhetoric and challenges the orator's naive faith in constitutional government. These conversations are more real to him than his daily interactions with neighbors. The ancients understand power in ways his contemporaries cannot imagine. They've seen republics rise and fall, watched empires crumble, witnessed the eternal dance between order and chaos. In his famous letter to Francesco Vettori, Machiavelli describes these evening sessions. I pass into their company, where affectionately received by them. I am fed with that food, which is mine alone, and for which I was born, where I am not ashamed to speak with them and ask them about the reasons for their actions, and they, in their humanity, answer me. This isn't scholarship, it's resurrection. Machiavelli brings the dead back to life, and they teach him secrets that the living dare not speak. December 1513. In the isolation of his farmhouse study, surrounded by the voices of ancient masters, Machiavelli begins writing the book that will damn his soul and save his legacy. Originally titled On Principalities, the work starts as a desperate attempt to regain employment. If he can't serve the Medici through experience, perhaps he can serve them through expertise. He'll write a manual for rulers, practical, honest, unvarnished by moral pretense. But as he writes, something darker emerges. The accumulated wisdom of 14 years in diplomacy, combined with the insights of classical authors and the bitter clarity of personal destruction, coalesces into something unprecedented in political literature. He's not writing a mirror for princes that reflects their virtues. He's constructing a manual for survival in a world where virtue is suicide. Every chapter distills lessons written in blood. Chapter 7 analyzes Cesare Borgia's rise and fall with surgical precision. Chapter 8 examines how men seize power through calculated cruelty. Chapter 15 argues that the gap between how men live and how they ought to live is so wide that anyone who abandons what is done for what ought to be done destroys himself. This isn't philosophy, it's anatomy. Machiavelli is dissecting power like a Renaissance physician dissects corpses, revealing the hidden mechanisms that make the body politic function. The book writes itself in white-hot intensity, as if 15 years of suppressed insights are pouring onto parchment in a single, sustained scream of understanding. By 1514, the Prince is complete. 108 pages that will reshape human understanding of politics forever. But Machiavelli faces a problem. He's written a book so honest about power that it terrifies everyone who reads it. He sends copies to friends, hoping for feedback and perhaps assistance in finding employment. The responses range from fascinated horror to outright condemnation. Even his closest allies warn him that publication would be political suicide. The book's crime isn't that it advocates evil, it's that it acknowledges evil as a necessary tool of governance. Machiavelli doesn't celebrate cruelty. He simply recognizes that rulers who refuse to use cruelty when necessary will be destroyed by those who don't share their scruples. But a world built on the pretense that politics and morality can coexist cannot tolerate such honesty. The Prince is a mirror that reflects humanity's true face, and humanity recoils from its own image. The book remains unpublished during Machiavelli's lifetime, circulating only in manuscript among a small circle of intellectuals. Its author will die never knowing that he's created the most influential political work in human history. From 1513 to 1527, Machiavelli wages a relentless campaign to return to public service. He writes letters to influential friends, composes treatises on military reform, and even attempts comedy writing, anything that might demonstrate his continued usefulness to the Medici regime. The irony is excruciating. The man who understands power better than anyone alive is powerless to regain his position. He knows exactly what needs to be done but lacks the means to do it. His knowledge becomes his curse. He can diagnose every problem but cure none. Florence suffers through a series of weak leaders while its greatest political mind tends chickens in the countryside. The city that once ruled Tuscany becomes a vassal of foreign powers, exactly as Machiavelli predicted it would. In 1520, he receives a minor commission to write a history of Florence, a consolation prize that pays barely enough to keep his family fed. The man who once negotiated with kings is reduced to chronicling their achievements for a pittance. Yet even in defeat, his mind continues working. He writes the Discourses on Livy, a massive analysis of Republican government that's arguably more sophisticated than The Prince. He completes his History of Florence, a masterpiece of political analysis disguised as narrative history. Every work reinforces the same brutal conclusion. The world belongs to those willing to take it, and morality is a luxury the strong can afford to impose on the weak. June 21st, 1527. Niccolò Machiavelli dies at age 58, probably from peritonitis, in the same city that exiled him 15 years earlier. His funeral is a modest affair. Some friends, family members, a few former colleagues who remember his diplomatic service. There are no state honors, no recognition of his intellectual achievements, no acknowledgement that Florence has lost its greatest political theorist. The Prince remains unpublished, known only to a handful of scholars who treat it like a dangerous secret. The man who will teach every future ruler how to seize and maintain power dies, broke, forgotten, and politically irrelevant. His greatest work, the book that will influence Napoleon, inspire Bismarck, and terrify Lincoln, sits in manuscript form, waiting for a world brave enough to confront its own nature. The final irony is perfect. Machiavelli dies at the exact moment when his expertise might have saved Florence. The city faces invasion by imperial forces, but its greatest military theorist lies in his grave, his wisdom buried with his bones. History will remember him as the devil's advocate. But he was actually something far more dangerous, a mirror held up to power, reflecting humanity's true face without flattery or forgiveness. 1532. 5 years after Machiavelli's death, The Prince finally sees print. Published by his friend Francesco Vettori, the book explodes across Europe like intellectual wildfire. What readers find isn't the work of a monster, but the diary of a man who stared into the abyss of human nature and reported what he saw. Every page strips away another layer of comforting illusion about how politics actually works. The book's power lies not in its cynicism, but in its clarity. Machiavelli doesn't celebrate cruelty. He simply acknowledges that leaders who refuse to use it when necessary will be destroyed by those who don't share their qualms. Within decades, The Prince becomes the secret textbook of European royalty. Kings read it in private, deny it in public, and apply its lessons with surgical precision. The Catholic Church places it on the Index of Forbidden Books, which only increases its underground influence. The dead Florentine has achieved something no living politician could manage. He's become the invisible advisor to every ruler in Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte carries a copy of The Prince during his campaigns, annotating it with observations about power and strategy. He later writes, "Machiavelli's Prince is the only book worth reading on politics." Otto von Bismarck uses Machiavellian principles to unify Germany through a combination of diplomacy and calculated violence. His famous doctrine of blood and iron could have been lifted directly from Chapter 7 of The Prince. Franklin D. Roosevelt applies Machiavellian analysis to domestic politics, using the Great Depression as cover for expanding federal power beyond anything the Constitution explicitly permits. When critics accuse him of authoritarianism, he quotes Machiavelli, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." Joseph Stalin keeps The Prince on his desk, treating it as a practical manual for maintaining control over a vast empire. His purges, though more extreme than anything Machiavelli advocated, follow the same logic. Eliminate potential threats before they can organize resistance. Even democratic leaders discover that Machiavellian insights apply to constitutional government. Lyndon Johnson's mastery of Senate politics, Ronald Reagan's use of media manipulation, and Bill Clinton's triangulation strategies all echo principles first articulated by the dead Florentine. The man who never held real power becomes the secret tutor of every leader who follows. Today, CEOs study The Prince in business schools, learning how to navigate corporate politics and eliminate rivals. Tech entrepreneurs apply Machiavellian principles to building monopolies and crushing competition. Political consultants treat the book as a playbook for winning elections through strategic deception and targeted manipulation. Steve Jobs exemplified Machiavellian leadership, demanding perfection, eliminating weakness, and maintaining absolute control over his company's image. His willingness to fire employees publicly and betray business partners privately followed patterns Machiavelli would have recognized. Jeff Bezos built Amazon through patient, systematic elimination of competitors, exactly as The Prince recommends. His long-term thinking and willingness to sacrifice short-term profits for strategic advantage demonstrate classic Machiavellian calculation. Modern dictators, from Xi Jinping to Vladimir Putin, apply updated versions of techniques Machiavelli observed in Cesare Borgia. They maintain power through careful balance of fear and benefit, eliminating threats while projecting strength to allies and enemies alike. The influence extends beyond politics and business into every sphere where power operates. Sports coaches, military officers, and even religious leaders discover that Machiavellian insights apply wherever human beings compete for dominance. The broken prisoner from 1513 has become the invisible emperor of the modern world. Niccolò Machiavelli committed the unforgivable sin. He told the truth about power in a world built on lies about virtue. He looked at politics without rose-colored glasses and reported what he saw, a realm where good intentions are weaknesses to be exploited and moral principles are luxuries the strong impose on the weak. The world crucified him for this honesty, branding him as evil incarnate and transforming his name into a synonym for calculated manipulation. But it also proved his point. They destroyed the messenger because they couldn't bear the message. 500 years later, his ghost haunts every throne room, every boardroom, every arena where human beings compete for dominance. Kings and presidents, CEOs and generals, anyone who seeks to lead others must eventually confront the brutal realities Machiavelli mapped with surgical precision. The question that tormented him still torments us. Is it possible to be good and powerful simultaneously? Or does the pursuit of power inevitably corrupt everything it touches? Machiavelli's life suggests a terrible answer. In a world of predators, the choice isn't between good and evil. It's between effectiveness and extinction. Those who refuse to play by power's rules don't change the game. They simply lose it. Perhaps that's why we still fear him. Not because he was a monster, but because he held up a mirror to our own monstrous world and forced us to see ourselves clearly. The man who died powerless and forgotten taught the world its most enduring lesson about power. Understand it, or be destroyed by it. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. And those few will not dare to oppose themselves to the opinion of the many. Niccolò Machiavelli, dead for 5 centuries, ruling still from his grave.